Now a couple of minutes late, but we are in fact legal. Okay, please can I welcome everyone to the meeting of the Licensing and Regulation Committee, which is taking place from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is now 6:35. My name is Councillor Hannah Williams and I am the chairperson of the committee. I have a few housekeeping points to make before we begin. Can I please advise that the open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded and potentially live streamed from the council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting is being made and will be publicly available shortly afterwards. Can I please remind all participants to speak clearly and remember to use your microphone. In addition, and I've got this in bold and red, people, in addition, please speak directly into the microphone and do not turn your head away when speaking. This will ensure that your comments are picked up for the audio and video recording, as well as improving audibility in the room. Can everyone please ensure that mobile phones or other electronics devices are on silent or switched off entirely? In the likely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound, and please follow any instructions given to you by staff or fire marshals. All fire exits are marked by green signs. Please proceed quickly and calmly to the assembly point, which is in Abbey Gardens. Do not use the lift. So, welcome to everyone present. Turning to the agenda. Apologies. So, I have apologies from Councillor Westwood and Councillor Atchwell, and their deputies are Councillor Clear and Councillor Cremoyson.
Yeah, we have apologies from Councillor Isaacs, and Councillor Pearson is stepping in.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so second point is disclosures of interest. Does anybody have any declarations that they need to make? Perfect. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 7th of June 2020. Okay, which are pages 5 and 6. So I'm going to ask if everybody agrees that they are clear and accurate record. Agreed. Okay, agreed. Brilliant. Okay, public participation. Sorry, my microphone keeps fading. So public participation. We have driving Miss Daisy's Paul News and Greg Blazard in attendance in order to respond to any questions under item 7. Welcome. Okay. So we're going to move on to looking at the review of the Hackney Carriages fares, which are page 70 to page 40. The recommendations are on page 7 of the agenda pack, but I would note that there is some new recommendations which have been tabled at the meeting to speed up processes of agreeing any changes. So I would start that we have a look at those recommendations and we'll go through them because obviously they've been amended. So you can see where the amendments are. Okay, recommendations. 1, that the Licensing and Regulation Committee consider whether the Hackney carriage fares should or should not be varied at this time. 2, where it is agreed that they should be varied, that the committee agrees with the process of the fare charts produced by the taxi and private hire forum as contained in Appendix 3 to the report and should be put forward for consultation. II agrees the length of time for the public consultation shall take place. The relevant legislation requires not less than 14 days and the licensing department is proposing 21. And then III, approving the list of consultees for the purpose of public consultation as shown in Appendix 5. So, 3, after close of consultation period, that the table of Hackney carriages fares, together with any representations received, will be put forward at the next appropriate Cabinet members' decision day for consideration and decision. So there, obviously, that's the sort of biggest change there to the ones that were previously 5 and 6. Okay. Right then. Okay, so I think we'll do what we normally do. We'll go through it sort of page by page, seeing if people have got any comments or questions. And as I say, once we get to any of the items? I mean, are we happy? I know Bryony's has a presentation for us, don't you, Bryony? No? No, you do. You do. I think you do have a presentation. Don't do that face on me. So, I mean, do we want to, when are we looking at the presentation? Do you want to do that?
So what I can do, Councillor, is I can summarise the reports and then obviously welcome any questions.
I think that might be the easiest way to do it. That way we can sort of hope you might answer some of our questions rather than us repeating ourselves. Okay. So it might be worth you just, summarising the report and then we'll get the questions.
Sure. So the report is in response to a request from the Taxi and Private Hire Forum on behalf of the taxi trade in Winchester to review the Hackney Carriage fares. So the procedure is that the forum submit a request to the council for a review. It isn't a review every year or every 3 years. So that review request was made following significant increases to trade-related costs and the cost of living since 2011, which is the year of the last fare increase. So I acknowledge that there's been quite an uplift in cost of living recently, but we're taking into account that the fares haven't actually increased since 2011, which is 10 years ago. A review was undertaken in 2016, but the decision was made not to increase the fares at that time, and that was following strong opposition from the trade that actually related to Hackney carriage vehicles not wishing to be undercut by some of the more modern app-based operators. The report cites a number of statistics for context, namely inflation, average weekly salary, global oil prices, and motor fuel prices. I do have some updated statistics today because obviously the report is written quite far in advance of this meeting. So if we need those, then I have those to refer to. So the Taxi and Private Hire Forum have proposed 4 options for fare charts, and they're at Appendix 3. It's based on a cost for a 2-mile fare, which is also how it's sort of measured nationally. So the cost for a 2-mile fare is between a 22.6% and 37.1% increase on the proposals from the trade. We've undertaken a survey of the trade based on these 4 proposals, and the most popular option was option 4, and the survey results can be found at Appendix 4 to the report. The licensing authority has also offered a 5th revised fare chart, and the reason we've offered that is to show you where we'd sit if we were average in Hampshire. I would say that Eastleigh Borough Council are around average at the moment based on my calculations. And so the 5th option that I've shown in Appendix 3 is very much based on the same 2-mile fare as Eastleigh Borough Council. We have covered the recommendations, so I don't need to summarise those. So I welcome any questions that anyone's got. And as I said, I do have some updated statistics if they're of use to anyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning and let's have a look. I don't think there's probably going to be any questions for anybody on page 9, anything there, which is our general sort of council plan outcome. I don't know if there's anything there that's raised any issues with anyone. So move on down to sort of page 10, which might have something as we look at the sort of survey responses and sort of 6.5 and all of that. Has anybody got any questions about the survey responses or anything on page sort of 10 or 11? Okay. Oh, yep, that's fine.
I don't have any page number on my, but I'll put the question in, then you can say
yep.
Either pick it up now or later. It's interesting comparing the fares over on the chart that we've been given, and indeed this one here in paragraph 11.19. But are we comparing like with like? I mean, for example, what is the average distance which is a taxi driver would drive compared, for example,
Bryony, do you know the answer to that question?
So at paragraph 11.14 onwards, I've provided some statistics from the Department for Transport's National Travel Survey.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those statistics don't actually indicate journey length, but what we can look at is that the majority of trips are taken for leisure purposes, and then you've also got things like commuting, personal business, shopping, and education. It's difficult to quantify journey length, and even the Taxi and Private Hire Forum weren't able to really tell me, because they might have 2 weeks of just taking people to the hospital, but then they might have a really good week in their books where they take someone to Heathrow and back. So it is really challenging to quantify that. The reason we've sort of based it on the 2 mile fare is because that is how it's sort of measured nationally, but that doesn't mean that a 2 mile fare is the most common length of journey. So I suppose it's really for the committee to look at the different distances that I provided, 1 mile through to 10 mile, I believe, and sort of consider whether the percentage increase is justifiable. I'm sorry, that doesn't really answer your question, Councillor.
No, Chair, I can see the statistics that Bryony is referring to, and a fair amount of detail there. Save the question I'm asking. I presume the fares in some way related to the driver's wages. I may or may not be right on that, and that means the average distance travelled becomes crucial or important. I mean, if you're in an urban area like London, then quite clearly the average distance you travel would be comparatively small, even though you pick up a lot of business in so doing. Whereas a more rural area like Winchester, for example, if you the average distance, not the mean taking 2 miles, but the average distance might be a great deal farther because we've got a bigger rural area. Might be something, Brian, if I don't know, consider in the future. Maybe a long time off, but if they are related to the driver's wages, that would become important. Plus, of course, the amount of fuel that they're using, and the fuel use is one of the things that's mentioned.
Okay.
Just a comment.
Right. So what I'll do is, if you haven't got page numbers on the thing, I'll also, when I'm talking about, I'll give you the sort of paragraph number so we know roughly where we are. So we're going to have a look now at page 12 on section 10 on risk management. Is there anything within the risk management that anybody has any concerns about or any questions? Okay. So then we move on to section 11, which we've already spoken a little bit about, and basically page sort of 13, 14 and 15, which gives us the background and current sort of fares and generally the types of passengers. So there are any questions from anybody on the committee about those? Yes, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for Bryony. Bryony, you've given the petrol prices shown on the 4th of August.
Number 11, that's 11.
That's 11.9. Of 194 for diesel and 184.5 for unleaded. Have you got an update on those prices based on the fact that I understand the petrol prices and diesel prices have dropped by over 9% since then, in the 4 weeks since then?
Thank you, Councillor. So I have today's petrol prices, if that's helpful. Like I said, the report is usually written quite far in advance of the meeting. So this is the average for Winchester city centre. We've got 174.2 per litre for unleaded. That is a 26.88% increase since 2011, and that's relevant because that is the last time that the fares were reviewed. And it is an average of 187.7 per litre for diesel, which is a 31.72% increase since 2011.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I notice your 187, the price of diesel, which most of the vehicles down there will be diesel vehicles. The southern parishes, you can buy diesel now for 181. You go slightly further afield, it is 178, I think, today in Horton Heath, which are either in or bordering on the district. So, will figure come out so high?
So the reason that we've provided figures from Winchester city centre, and that is using the centre of the city and then a 5 mile radius, all the petrol stations in a 5-mile radius is because the majority of Hackney carriage drivers work in the city centre, or at least are based in the city centre. So Hackney carriage is where obviously you're picked up from a taxi rank. We only have taxi ranks in the centre of Winchester. There are none in the parishes. And whilst, yes, they could travel elsewhere to buy their petrol, we're basing it on the fact that the majority of them do work in the city centre and would be paying those prices.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Brian, I hear what you say, and I hear, you know, it's city-centric. But if I was running a business as a taxi, if I could shave best part of 10p a litre off the price of my fuel, I would drive down to, okay, Bishop's Waltham, which is a 22-mile round trip, and save myself quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Councillor, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of our drivers do that. But if drivers need to fill up during the day, then the reality is that they are filling up in Winchester. This is very much based on what I know from the taxi and private hire forum. So obviously I'm not a taxi driver myself. They represent the trade, and so they've advised that they do primarily work in Winchester. Obviously I can get you wider district figures, but you'd need to give me about 10 minutes.
I mean, I would also think the important point is actually what it is for the taxi trade. And though, of course, you can go and fill up and it could be a 22-mile trip and financially that could be cheaper, but you have to count into the fact whilst you're doing that 22-mile trip, you are also losing trade because you are not here in town doing it. So actually you have to add and factor that in. So sometimes it's one of those false economies, isn't it? Something seems cheaper. Anyway, I'm going to go to Councillor Cromoyson as he had his hand up, then Councillor Reach and then Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Just listening to that discussion there, I mean, we all know that fuel prices go up and hopefully they'll come down. They'll probably go up again and they'll come down, so they oscillate. And I'm presuming we're not looking to adjust the taxi fares every time the fuel price changes. So could you just elaborate a bit more on the other factors that are behind the taxi trade's desire to increase fares? And I'm guessing it's going to be things like the cost of living increase today compared with what it was in 2011, which is a long time ago. So perhaps you could just talk through some of those other factors.
Thank you, Councillor. So I've provided a number of factors in the report, which I've tried to provide factors that are measurable, and I'll take those as read. The more colloquial evidence that I've had from the taxi drivers is that the majority of them are struggling to pay the insurance for their vehicles. Vehicles are expensive. Those who are reaching the upper age limit permitted by our policy are having to buy new vehicles to continue working. Wheelchair accessible vehicles, which our Hackney carriages have to be, are upwards of £50,000. So there's a lot of additional costs involved. Even just the cost of going to get new tyres on your car, I'm sure many people here will agree that it's significantly more expensive than it was 10 years ago. And a lot of those prices, they're difficult to quantify, to put in this report as statistics. But that anecdotal evidence that I've got from the trade is that a lot of them are making a loss. They're going out every day to work. Some of them only take home £30 a day to their families. A lot of them have had to diversify and start working for Amazon or for Tesco or having second jobs, which was never their intention. And that's why you don't see quite as many taxis in the street anymore, because a lot of them are off doing something else, just trying to make ends meet. So I think, again, a lot of the things that have risen are quite difficult to quantify in writing, but I think we can agree that the taxi drivers are having a particularly difficult time now, but also looking at the increases in the last 10 years, I think that's quite significant. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Yes, I think it's quite reasonable to assume that the cost of living has increased over the last 11 years.
Councillor Reach.
Thank you. You raised my point.
Yes, hi, thank you, Bryony. I have been online as the discussion has progressed, and petrol stations in Winchester are selling diesel at 181.9 and that's in Tesco's, Petrol, St Bartholomew, Winchester, and Shell at Winall. I'm not saying that this is going to be set in aspic. These prices, as Councillor Cremosen said, they fluctuate up, they fluctuate down, and we can't but understand that it's a picture at a specific point in time. But at the end of the day, those prices, the current prices of petrol and diesel, at 181.9 for diesel and 171.9 for petrol, represents a 26% increase in diesel and 23% increase in petrol.
Councillor Kern.
Yeah, I was just looking at point 11.19. So the increase on option 4, which you mentioned, was the kind of favourable increase for them. Obviously, we'd put that at £8.50 for the 2 mile fare, which would put us as the most expensive as per the local authority at the moment. Excuse me, conscious that our district is far and wide, not just obviously the city centre of Winchester. When you start then looking at Appendix 3 and going outside of that radius of more than 3 miles, it's then going up by 40%, 42%, 46.5%. Obviously, it's important for those businesses to make money and be sustainable. But at the same point, if the end user isn't prepared to pay that money, they're going to lose out on business. So I was just wondering how that's taken into account by the drivers, because at the same point, we don't want to do something that then puts them in more hardship because the money's not there, because the end user can't afford to get that taxi to make the hospital appointment, because it needs to work both ways. We want to support our taxi drivers, but obviously if we're then going to enable them to put those prices up and take that business away, would just be a bit of a concern. And how's that factored in? Will we engage with the end user as well?
So the survey that was sent out was sent to all members of the current taxi and private hire trade. I think it is, I understand why they've all just gone for the more expensive option, because they're thinking, yes, we'll get more money, because ultimately that's more money in their pockets. In the taxi and private hire forum, we had a really lengthy conversation about balancing the importance of taxi drivers being able to continue their business and also their customers being able to afford. And that's why they proposed a range of options. They actually only wanted to put forward 2, but they all ended up wanting to put forward 4 so that they could show a range. I think it's really up for the committee as representatives of the constituents of Winchester, who are ultimately the customers and the end user of the taxi service, to determine what they think that balance is. The balance, like I said, between the taxi drivers being able to continue their business and providing that valuable service to our community, and the customers being able to afford any increase in fares, if that is what the committee choose to do today. And you'll see that I've included an equality impact assessment that does raise some concerns around people who require taxis as a primary source of transport for disability or other accessibility reasons. So they're all things to take into consideration, I think.
Thank you. So I think actually interestingly, I think one of the points that I think Councillor Kern asked there about it, we are consulting, and I think if we look at the appendix, isn't it? Is it appendix? Appendix 5, page 29, you can actually see quite an extensive list of the groups that we will be seeking to consult. So I think, you know, the whole point is that the taxi forum and the taxi operators have put forward options that they want, and the point of you know, this committee is to look at it, discuss it, and then ensure that those, you know, proposals are put out to the actual end users, and then we get the kind of response from them. And I think that's the key kind of thing. We'll get their response, and that will be kind of the thing that allows us to make our decision. Okay, so I'll carry on. So we've had a look here, and we've got section on page 15, passengers, section 11.14, and then we go on onto page 16, and we look here, and we have the section 11.17, which is neighbouring authorities. So I think we sort of brought that up, and Brian actually has a point, so please do.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I have just noted an error on my report on page 16. The 2 mile fare for Hart District Council, the most expensive in Hampshire, is not £6.80, it is £8.20.
gosh, that is significantly higher. Okay, continue. So we're looking at page 17, 11.23 proposals, and then through onto page 18 and option 4, 11.27, and then page 19, 12.1. Which brings us to the end of paper, and now we have the appendices to look through. So page 21, we have Hackney Carriages taxi fares as Appendix 1. Any questions on that? Councillor Cromoyson.
Actually, I've got a question about section 11 and the options here. I've also got a follow-up question to something you said earlier, so if you could indulge me with two.
I will.
So the first question related to wheelchair access, and I'm interested to know what type of wheelchairs have to be accessible in the Hackney carriages, have to be able to get into that, and does that apply to all of them? And it relates actually to the following paper, where we're going to be talking about that type of subject. So that's the first question. And the second question relates to the potential increased tariffs. Now, nobody likes to pay more for things. So fully understand why the public would, if given a choice, will say we'd rather not have the prices increased. But what I want to understand is, what are the benefits to the public, the customers, of having higher tariffs? And I'm tempted to lead you, but I'm going to leave it as an open question and see what you say, because I can see some potential benefits. So perhaps those are two questions.
Thank you, Councillor. So first I'll address your question about wheelchair accessibility. We have 50 saloon vehicles, which are licensed as Hackney carriages. They are not required to take wheelchairs. We will not license any more. That number is set in our policy. Any new Hackney carriage vehicle and any one beyond that 50 does need to be wheelchair accessible, and they can either be side loading or rear loading. Rear loading, generally you can have a smaller vehicle, and then side loading, a lot of our drivers tend to prefer because you load from the pavement. The majority of our vehicles are designed to take manual wheelchairs, if you like, so not mobility scooters or ones that will self-driving. And that is due to the weight of a lot of these wheelchairs. To have a vehicle that can take a wheelchair of that type and design would cost a significant amount, and I'm sure my colleagues from Driving Miss Daisy will agree. So we ask that our vehicles, as per our policy, will take one wheelchair and a minimum of one other passenger.
So just to clarify then, what you're saying is this is wheelchair users who are mobile enough to get from their wheelchair into the vehicle without substantial help.
So the wheelchair can be pushed up the ramp with the individual still inside it. A lot of our drivers will take somebody who is able to transfer from the wheelchair into the car, but in those cases they may even be able to use a saloon vehicle, which is not wheelchair accessible. To answer your second question, and I'm sure you're anticipating this in response, the benefit of an increase in fares is ultimately the maintenance of our taxi trade. Without an increase in fares, many of them will leave the trade. We have already lost, I should have brought the statistics with me, but we've lost at least 50 drivers during the COVID pandemic due to financial hardship. As the financial hardship continues, then I doubt we'll retain many more. And like I said, many of them are moving to other streams of income, and I quite frankly wouldn't blame them if they took those other streams of income as their full-time job. I think that's the primary benefit, honestly. I understand that it is challenging to raise prices at a time when nobody wants prices to be risen. But again, it's that balancing act between maintaining their valuable service and the affordability for customers.
Right, so basically you maintain the number of vehicles that are out there and actually out there in terms of numbers of hours, Otherwise, those taxi drivers will either move into different work or they may move to other areas that are offering better tariffs.
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
not just an assumption I've made either. You know, my taxi and private hire forum are very vocal, and many of them are working additional jobs, or their stay-at-home mum has had to get a job to support them. You know, the kids aren't having childcare at the moment because they can't afford the childcare. There's a lot of different changes that we are all having to make, but those adjustments could ultimately result in the loss of our taxi trade.
I think that's part of our role here as the council. I think we have to remember we're not here just to serve our constituents in keeping things at a good price, and we're also here to maintain a service. And for those of us who have cars and don't use taxis, you perhaps don't realise the value of them, but for people who do use taxis on a regular basis, it is absolutely vital, and often sometimes for some of our more rural or semi-rural places where buses aren't frequent are the only means. So I think it is really important that we are seen to be protecting and looking for our residents' interests, but actually part of that is also looking after the taxi. So I think that's quite important as we're going through it. Okay, let me put my glasses back on so I can see. All right then. Okay, Hackney carriage fares. So we've got here obviously the different types of fares, the daytime, nighttime, Christmas Day. And no questions on that one. And then of course we have the minutes here from the taxi and private hire forum meeting on the 12th of July. And then finally, maybe the one that might cause some questions, I think, will be Appendix 3, which is the proposals for the Hackney carriage fares. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or any points on any of those, if they understand the maths that's behind it. No questions, that's brilliant, excellent. Okay. Then what we have as our next appendix is the carriage fare review pre-consultation summary survey. So here we have a number of questions that have been with their responses. And as Bryony indicated, the majority, if we look at the last question, did seem to prefer option 4, and we can understand that. And then finally, the consultation group, which hopefully everybody's had a good chance to have a read because it is quite extensive, and is happy that we have not missed anything, nothing glaring there. I don't think I can see anything. It seems to be, as I said, a very comprehensive list. Okay, then that brings us to the Equality and Impact Assessment Template Data Checklist. Nope. And then we have that section 2 of that on page 33. Continue on to page 34 and 35, 36, 7, 8, and then finally page 39. And then that brings us to the end of that report. So any issues or questions that anybody has? So, Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask, to do with the consultation, how are taxi drivers, will they be contributing to this consultation? And please may I kind of recommend that could the consultation go out to the public for about 28 days rather than 14 or 21? Would that be possible?
Firstly, the taxi and private hire trade are, of course, consulted. It's a public consultation, so whilst we're writing to all of the individuals on that list directly, the consultation is published in a local newspaper, will be displayed on the notice board in reception at the council offices, and will be on the council's website, so anyone can respond, but we will write to those people specifically. In relation to the consultation period, the legislation just says not less than 14 days. So it is really up for this committee to determine what is a proportionate length of time for a consultation. That's one of the recommendations.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Bryony, I hear what Councillor Clare says, but the problem that is confronting the taxi businesses, as alluded to, is they're under a huge amount of pressure now. If we extend the consultation period out to 28 days, that's another month, losing a lot of money, and probably, as you say, some going out of business. So, in your experience, what is the difference between a 14-day, say, and a 28-day consultation period? What will the numbers of respondents be that is different?
In licensing, we do typically deal with 28-day consultation periods, but that relates to premises licensing, which I'm sure many of you will know, and that's set by law. The minimum of 14 days is from the Town Police Clauses Act, which is a piece of legislation from the 1800s, which hasn't been updated for some time. It's really, I think people tend to respond to things quicker if they're online, which is our intention, to put this all over, social media and use our communications team to help us with that, and to do it in the form of an online survey, which will take less than 5 minutes to complete and can be completed on your mobile phone. I think we also need to acknowledge that a lot of the people who use taxi and private hire services are not necessarily going to be that familiar with technology, especially some of our older residents. So I will return to the phrase striking the balance between ensuring that the taxi trade get the review that they want, and hopefully, in their view, a fair increase, but also ensuring that we gather the interests of the residents of Winchester, the opinions of the residents of Winchester. I've recommended 21 days based on conversations I've had with our portfolio holder, Councillor Porter. We felt that that was a good balance to strike between the 14 days as defined in legislation and the 28 days that would be the council's usual preference. But again, it really is for this committee to decide today.
Just a supplementary. How long will it take to prepare it before it then has 21 days? How long is the thing itself going to take before it is implemented?
So if the committee make a decision on which proposal they want to make this evening, I will be sending out the consultation tomorrow. It's already prepared. I just need to insert the figures. After the consultation period, if we receive objections or no objections, either way, it goes to Cabinet Member Decision Day, which we will need to wait for. The next available one, if we do a 21-day consultation period, is in November. And then we will need to have the taxi drivers have their taxi meters updated so that the software that's installed on their taxi meter needs to be updated, which takes usually about 3 days.
I mean, actually, a point raised. I mean, is it quicker for a special meeting of licensing to be called if a decision is made, as opposed to waiting for an actual cabinet day? Is that something that could be done quicker rather than?
Nancy is waving her hand at me, and she is the appropriate person to ask.
Under the council's constitution, the actual decision on the fare level needs to be made by cabinet or a cabinet member decision day. So there's the potential possibly to call a decision day quicker, but not a licensing meeting.
Could potentially have a look to do.
We would try to respond because, as we said, it's not just that, but we need to get something sorted out on the machines sorted out, and we need to be there really in good time for the Christmas.
Yeah. And yes, and that will be one of the largest fair times of the year, so needing to make sure that they're actually able to make the money. Councillor Breach had his hand up. I don't know if you've...
Yeah, so first I'd just like to say thank you. It's a really thorough piece of work, and thanks for having very clear and concise answers. It's very, very good. There's just one thing I'd like to raise, not necessarily with the problem with the paper, but I think it's worth noting that for LGBT communities, I think access to cheap and reliable taxis is very significant. I think we don't say there is sexual orientation as something to consider as part of this paper, but I think travelling late at night back on the train from London, for example, given the choice of walking through town or taking a taxi, I think many people in the LGBT community would rather take a taxi and feel a lot safer having done that. So I'd like that to be noted, please.
Chairman, I didn't quite understand what Councillor Reach is getting at there. There's a section of this paper about equality. So I presume everybody's paying the same fare on a quality basis. Is the councillor suggesting there should be a different rate for this community?
All I'm suggesting, thank you, and thank you for the question. No, all I'm suggesting is that walking through Winchester High Street late at night holding hands with a same-sex partner has different considerations than walking through with a partner of the opposite sex. And members of the LGBT community would be very, very clear in telling you that that's something that they would consider in how they get home from the station, for example, but other journeys as well. So accessibility to reliable taxis, I'm not saying a different or differential fare, is significantly more important to certain groups in our community than to others.
Chairman, would that be different for an elderly person getting off
I think
train at station?
I think we're kind of going a little bit off course here. I think what Councillor Reach was trying to say, I'm going to paraphrase you, and hopefully I'm correct, is really that as also as a woman walking home, and it's it's the same for ladies. Often, if I'm walking home at night, having a reliable taxi service for lots of groups. So for groups that and that could be men on their own as well, but for all of us is actually vital. And to have a cohesive community, actually taxis are a vital part of that. So I think we'll close down on that because I don't think it has any actual relevance to the recommendations. I think the key things that we need to be...
Chairman, I recognise your position as chair, and it's every right to close it down, but I point out an elderly person getting off the train at 10 or 11 o'clock from London, going down to Sulmore or Bishop's Waltham, have the same issues, security issues or whatever issues. So, if we are talking about equality, let's deal with equality, not special groups.
Okay. All right, then. I think we can conclude that taxis actually provide a service for almost every single group, and actually, we appreciate that. Exactly. Okay, so let's get back to the recommendation. So the key things that we have to be agreeing are that whether the Hackney carriage fare should be varied or not at this time. And where that is agreed, then we have to go on to agree which of the proposed fare charts by the Taxi and Private Hire Forum, which is on page 25, Appendix 3, should be put forward for consultation. So that really is one of the key things that we need to be kind of getting moving tonight. So if we're to turn to page 25 now and have a look, and when we talk about this, Bryony, how many options would be preferable to be put forward? Because we've already been given the 5 options here. So what is it we would be looking for a consultation to be the optimal amount to actually work with the users for them to be able to respond effectively?
So the legislation requires us to put forward one option for consultation. If we were to receive objections to that option put forward, then naturally amendments could be made at the Cabinet Member Decision Day in response to those objections if that was deemed necessary. Sorry, Councillor, I should also note that members can amend any of the options presented today if they felt that necessary. It is quite time consuming to do the maths, as I'm sure you can imagine, but I hope that the options provided sort of give you enough to work with.
Okay, so what we've got here, if we look closely at them, is obviously as they go along, they become more expensive. So what we have here is basically our pull-off charge, so the charge at which when you get into the taxi, the pull-off distance. So I know that was in the report about the fact that it's all old-fashioned and basically in yardage and everything like that. So what we have here with option 1, 4 and 5, we have the same 660, but with options 2 and 3, that is obviously 550. What impact does that have, just so as if we're deciding on it, we know?
Yeah, of course. So your pull-off distance is the period of time that you will only be charged the pull-off charge. So if you only travelled 660 yards, you would be charged £2.80 under our current fare charts. Then the yardage distance is the amount of yards that it takes for the fare to tick over. So every 170 yards, you will be charged 20 pence. If that makes sense. I appreciate it's old money. The Taxi and Private Hire Forum were very keen not to amend the format because that requires a complete software rewrite, which can take months.
Right. So do we have any discussion or any things on preferences for options? Councillor Cremoyson.
Thank you, Chair. We're starting to get into a discussion about which of these options, some questions around it. I wonder if there's merit in the process of at least establishing whether the evidence suggests that a variation in the fares should be made. Is that a reasonable thing to do first? Because if actually the view was not to, there's no point discussing all those different options.
Okay. So are we? Yes. No. I get what you're saying. That we need to agree on point one. Are we happy that they should or should not be varied? I think you're right. It's a pointless discussion on this point two if we haven't agreed point one. Yeah, and then the supplementary to that is then we need to think about the process by which we are going to figure out how to whittle that down to one option. Or are we going to present the public with two or three options? I think it's one, isn't it? It is one. Okay. Okay. So I suppose first, as a committee, are we happy to agree point one, that we are considering that they should be varied at this time? Are we happy that we are going to look to vary them and to, a show of hands? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, so now as Councillor Cremoyson moved on, we can have the discussion on Appendix 3 and which ones of these options that we want. Was that, or you just, no, just picking up your glasses, sorry. Okay. So we know that option 4 was the preference for the taxi and hire, wasn't it, Bryony? Yeah, that was that. So we know that one. Have you got a question? Councillor McLean.
Well, it's not so much a question, but I suppose I want to make it one. Looking at option 4 and looking at the 10-mile fare, which is Bishop's Waltham is 11 miles from Winchester. That's going to put round trip pounds, or it's going to put somebody just going from Winchester to Bishop's Waltham at £33.40. 11 miles is about 60p.
Fine.
That's probably about right. No, it's about 90p's worth of fuel.
Okay. Yep. I mean, I think I get your point. It is, and of course, obviously, at the moment, looking at it being £22.80, that does feel it is a significant increase. I'm assuming it says 46.5%, which is a significant increase. But I suppose that's kind of the point of what we're here for. Councillor Reach.
Thank you. Yes, just procedurally, I think we've gone out and we've consulted with the people most affected by this directly in terms of their business. They've told us they prefer option 4. I think I would propose that would be put out a further consultation to the list that's at one of the appendices, and we see what people who use the service themselves would think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a logic in that if they prefer it, it's not the, yeah, but at the end of the day, they're the ones providing a business that either the public will or won't use. They must have, a logic behind it. I'm assuming that most businesses aren't going to price themselves out of the market. Anyway, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Bryony, the number of people from the carriage people, they put down option 4 as their favourite one and option 2 as their second favourite. Can you give me the numbers again and percent?
Bear with me while I find the right page.
One was it 40? Option 4 was 45%. Option 2 is 28%.
So option 2 is a reasonably high figure of drivers.
Almost a third. Wow.
So for statistically, or rather to give you a figure, a 2-mile fare would cost £7.60, which is an increase of approximately 22.6% from the current 2-mile fare. That would put us at approximately position 33 on the private hire and taxi monthly chart.
When you mean 33, and how many?
355.
So we would be one of the more expensive ones then, would we?
Correct. Option 5 that I proposed puts us at an average in Hampshire. That isn't me saying I'm for or against, as I'm sure you know. That's not my job. But just so that you have the average, option 5 puts us at 131, which is around the average in Hampshire, if that's helpful.
Chair, can I make a point, please?
Yes, of course.
Interesting that you say that this option 2, the 2-mile fare of £7.60. It's interesting that that's 22.6%. When you look at the actual increase in the amount of the charge and the price of petrol and diesel of 23 between 20 over the 11 years.
Councillor Kern?
Yeah, my obviously concern was obviously option 4 is that highest one, as we've kind of discussed today. And obviously, if we go to the consultation again, and then the consultation of the general public is that they're not keen for that, we're delaying this process even more. So would it be worth our consideration to split the difference and say that if option 2 was a second preference, actually it's kind of in the middle, and it may be a fair starting point, and at the end of the day, there's nothing then stopping us in a couple of years' time assessing it again. Hopefully that wouldn't mean that's a too late of a decision, but by meeting in the middle ground, and we could say as a byproduct of that we'll then reassess again in 18 months if you think that's an appropriate re-evaluation, depending on how the world changes in the next 2 years. I'm just thinking that might be a more successful outcome that isn't going to aggravate the consultees too much and not delay this process even more, in the sense of our concern that we want to kind of get this in before Christmas to benefit our drivers as much as we can.
I think yes, I mean, I think there's some good points there. I think we also know that it's not just fuel, it's also insurance, purchasing, all of that. So they are also kind of key factors. I mean, does anybody else within the group have any comments? Councillor Laming first, and then I'll do Councillor Comoyson.
Thank you, Chair. What's the actual cost increase in the general public's purse from 2011 to now? Probably that's going to be more than 26%.
I think, Councillor, I've included, forgive me while I find the page, I've included it in our background in the report. Paragraph 1111 on page 15. The Office for National Statistics reported that the average weekly earnings for persons living in Great Britain in April 2011 were £462 per week. I acknowledge this is the whole of Great Britain and not Winchester. And in May 2022, reported that the same figure was 601 weekly. So that's a 30% increase between 2011 and 2022.
Thank you.
Councillor Comoy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm struggling a little bit to get my head around how the consultation will work, and what is the likelihood of the consultees coming back and saying, yeah, give me that increase of 20% or any percent, frankly. So I'm not quite sure how that works, but I'll put my trust in you that it will work. But I have to say, just if I was looking at those 4 options and thinking, how would the public react? People who use taxis regularly, if they get in a taxi at Winchester Station or for that matter, anywhere else in the district, and suddenly get somewhere and they're paying 40% higher than they're used to paying, that could be a bit of a shock, even in today's terms. So I'm kind of feeling very much on the same page as Councillor Kern, that yes, a variation is needed, but kind of we probably need to phase it in, go with a lower figure, that number 2 option, with a view to having another look at it in a year or 2 years' time. So if I was voting, that's where I'd be going for. But I don't know, if in the end that is insufficient to keep taxi businesses in business, then that may not be enough. It may well be that we're no better off. So it's a struggle to work out how to respond to this. So,
Chair.
Okay, sorry, I have Councillor Clear. Oh, and then I have Councillor Bartho and Councillor Cunningham. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, would Bryony like to do it as she's got on there?
So the way that the consultation works is that if we receive objections, then naturally they're considered by our cabinet member and amendments made if necessary. We might receive one objection, we might receive 101. It's not usual for people to write comments in support, and also the legislation doesn't require people to do that either. So we're not going to get votes for or against from the public. If people have objections, they will make them, and any comments in support we don't actually take into consideration because they're not required by legislation. I think it's really for our cabinet member to obviously review any objections received and make that decision, applying appropriate weight to those objections as well, depending on who they've come from and the reasons for that objection. I have confidence that anyone who feels that they'll be adversely impacted by the fares will make themselves known to us.
Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I agree with Councillor Kern. When I read the paper, for some reason, option 2 kind of shot out and it made each all the time. Of course, fuel prices have changed a lot since 2011, and may I suggest, with the greatest of respect, that we don't leave it 11 years again to look at it, please. It's rather a long time. There is a delicate balance, obviously, on how much and about disadvantages to passengers, but advantages to raise it for the Hackney drivers. But I would opt for option 2 with a review in 2 years, possibly. Thank you.
Just to note that there was actually a review in 2016, wasn't there? And it was actually the Taxi Driving Forum that chose not to take an increase. So we have reviewed it. It was reviewed, but just to remind you of that. Councillor Bartho.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to caution in terms of options 2 and 3. There will be, as a result of the change in pull-off distance and the yardage, a change of perception from customers. They will see the meter ticking over at a fast rate. Therefore, I am concerned that that would then actually have negative impact. There would be a question that there would be raised as a result of that, which might then have a negative feedback to the service and question that we would have to then take. I think from reading the information, we have 2 levers to pull in terms of the pull-off charge and then the yardage rate. My preference would actually be to go for option 5, because it is actually very similar to option 4, which is the question then would be whether and how vary the yardage rate. Actually, but my concern with option 4 is that has been identified already, is that for those distances, therefore, I think we have to make a decision that we're going to affect users of shorter distances more, therefore allow the longer distances to be subsidised by that. As I say, my sort of preference would be option 5, because it actually middle table, but it doesn't actually have that negative as option 4 does. Chair.
Okay, so I think we did. Councillor Kern, did you have your hand up or no? It was Councillor Cunningham and then Councillor.
Yeah, I'm listening very carefully what Councillor Bartho says, and I think there's a lot of truth in that we have to consider. Option 2 is equally attractive, but if you're looking at the 10-mile fares and the fares above that, you've got a whole section of rural community are not going to use taxis. Bear in mind, the bus services finish in the evening in the rural areas. For example, I couldn't get a bus back out of Southampton to Swanmore because the buses stopped running. I think it's about something like 6 o'clock in the evening. This has got to be considered, but at the same time, the income of the taxi drivers have to be considered as well. So really, we're asking, I mean, I'm delighted from a political point of view to leave the decision to Councillor Porter, but that's a political comment rather than a reality comment. And a reality comment, I think these distant 10 miles, the cost, when we talk about best part of £60 return fare, really knocks a whole tranche of people out of using taxis when really they have to because they've opted out of a car and there's no bus service. So, you know, that has got to be taken into account by us all. As well as being cynical politically, the reality is, you know, you're just financially people in lower incomes or even my age group just can't use taxis at those prices. The up to 5 miles, yes, these are optional. These can be looked at seriously. But of course, if you're living Wickham, for example, or Curdridge, or Swanmore, or Denmead, financially, it's just out of the reach. And remember, it's not just elderly or special interest groups, you know, are using the things, but you get business people coming in from London late at night, people coming down from theatre from London late at night, and effectively they're stranded unless they have their car, which we want as a policy to discourage car use, and yet we're saying from these prices, you have to use a car use if you want to get home.
Okay, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. I hear what Councillor Bartho and Councillor Pearson said, but I do not see how in option 5, any journeys between 3 and 10 miles representing an increase over 11 years of between 2.2% and 6% is going to save the taxi hackney service in Winchester. It certainly won't. And also, I do remember seeing somewhere in the documents as well, Bryony, that the Taxi Forum also suggested that they were looking at the same price for Southampton at £7.60 for a 2-mile journey in order to, because a lot of their drivers come from Southampton, etc., etc. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor. So a lot of, one of the more frequent journeys that our drivers undertake is from Winchester to Southampton or vice versa. So that's why they were looking to try and align a 2-mile fare with Southampton, which is £7.60, which would be option 2, which I think, you know, goes to show why that was the second preferred option survey. I don't know, Chair, whether you're happy for me to just provide Councillor Pearson with some reassurance about the availability of taxis in the rural area.
That would be great.
Hackney carriages make up a very small proportion of the licensed vehicles that that are available in Winchester. Private hire vehicles actually make up nearly 3/4 of the vehicles available in Winchester. So you might be familiar with operators such as Wintax or Wessex. You phone them up and you book a taxi, a private hire vehicle, forgive me. They're not subject to the same fares. They can charge whatever they like. They do tend to charge something that's comparable because they obviously want the business. But their availability is significantly higher in the rural areas, and we do have a lot of operators that specifically operate in the rural areas. So we have one in Alresford who only operates in Alresford. There's a couple in Whiteley who only work in Whiteley, etc. So there is the availability, but I do acknowledge that a price increase would still adversely affect some users.
So I think what we need to look at, have you got another, Councillor Batho, have you got one more? And then I think we should try and sort of draw ourselves into deciding on the options. We've had a couple of, sorry for my feedback.
Thank you, Chair. I think, yes, just going back to Councillor Cunningham, my point was that, as I say, I was slightly concerned in actually changing any of the actual distances and within the scheme. We could, through decisions made here, actually mirror any of the options by, sort of using the, say, 2 factors that are available. We don't have to go with, just because they've come up with 4 options, distance provided option 5. What I'm saying is, from my point of view, I think it would actually introduce a variable which we don't need to, using the distances aspect. Suggest that you could have an option 5 which might the rate of 25p, but actually they increase the income. So all I'm saying is that there are variables that can be changed, don't actually have an effect on the customer's perception of the actual service being provided. That's all I'm.
Okay, so I suppose we're having to sort of drill down to people. I mean, I don't know how the best way to do this is. Is it to vote on each option and then to go from that and then see how we can do? Okay, so all those in favour of option 1, please raise your hands. Looks like no one. Okay, all those in favour of option 2, please raise your hands. Okay, that's all bar 1. Option 3. Do it anyway for democracy. Option 4. And then finally, I suppose we've got option 5. So that is almost unanimously, is the majority is to option 2. So that would be the one that I think we would recommend, or we would be recommending to go forward for consultation. Okay. The next thing is to agree the length of time. I know that Councillor Clear would like it to be 28 days. And I know I have some concerns about it only being 21. I think my biggest, because I'm again equally torn in that I don't want the process to be any longer for the taxi, community, because I believe that this has already been a number of months in the sort of getting to this point, and I think it really is, what is the benefit to, and I think for me it would be more those elderly, older users, and I think that would be my biggest concern. Things going on social media, things being on websites, they are not touching that. The younger users are. So how can we be confident that within 21 days we will be able to get responses from those more elderly groups who perhaps are going to be one of the larger user groups of it, and those sorts of groups? So are we confident that that is something that is doable, or do we feel we need to push it to the 28? I think that would be the question. So Brian, if I would ask you that.
So in relation to reaching the older demographic, we do place a notice in the newspaper. I understand that a lot of people do still read newspapers. That will obviously be on the newspaper's website as well. That's a legal requirement, so there's no getting around that. It goes in the newspaper. We're also consulting ward councillors and parish councillors. So I will say that there might be an element there of relying on our elected officials to help spread that message through their relevant forums and parish council meetings, etc. I suppose it's whether those elected officials feel that they are able to do that, or whether they would rather that there was a longer consultation period. So again, balance.
Councillor Porter first,
Thank
and then
you.
Councillor.
I think of 2 particular groups of users that I see using taxis at the moment. That's the group of people who wait outside Sainsbury's in Winchester. They are a very realistic group, and I would like to see some signs put up. Perhaps we can encourage some of the supermarkets to put up things in their windows so that people know about it. They often have notice boards as well. So just something that makes it very accessible. There's obviously the station as well, but I'm really pleased to see some of the old people's homes on here. But we've also got a lot of sites where they are living independently, but perhaps have given up their car. Wayfarer Place in Alresford's an example, but also very keen to see those longer journeys. I've used a taxi quite a few times in the last few years. I do a lot of long distance walks, and I know that I could walk 30 miles. I used to spend £30 on a journey that I knew I could walk back in a day. And interestingly, this year it's gone to £40, which makes you think twice. So I do appreciate what Councillor McLean said and Councillor Pearson about the longer journeys. So we'll think about how we can try and get out to those conversations with people that perhaps don't use social media but are living further away? I think that is a question, and perhaps it is to supermarkets as one of them.
So we've got Councillor McLean, and then was it Councillor Cremoyson, and then hopefully we'll be able to talk about the last four.
On this point of communication, there's a lovely long list of all the care homes on there. So if we write to the care homes or email the care home managers and ask, because they'll be one of the users of taxi, maybe we should ask them to do the response and get that group of people back very, very much faster if there is a response.
So that was really the intention behind writing to the care homes and sheltered housing accommodation, is that we're not necessarily looking for a response from the people who manage that facility, but for them to communicate it with the residents. And we can make that clear in the consultation letter as well, rather than just the same letter. I like Councillor Porter's idea of putting posters up in key community locations, but from a logistics point of view, I just want to make members aware that it would just take a little bit more time, just for us to obviously get approved public messaging out through our communications team. But realistically, it could probably be done by next week rather than sending out a consultation tomorrow, which is what was planned. But, you know, councillors might think that 21 days from next week is a reasonable amount of time. So I'll leave that for you.
Councillor Cremoyson.
Okay. As I see it, there's a consultation period, and then there's looking at the responses and analysing it, and then running it past, past various stakeholders and democratic processes and all that sort of stuff. So I'm thinking in my head, does it make any material difference to when the end decision is and the end it being implemented, whether it is 21 or 28? Because if it doesn't make a material difference to the outcome in terms of the decision point, let's not debate it. Let's just put it as give the longest period of time up to a point. So would it make a material difference? Do we miss a decision day, or do we miss something? Because if we do, changing it to 28 days could mean it's 3 months further out.
So by going for 28 days, we would miss the November decision day, I think. I'm looking at Nancy with doubt, but I think that is what I've got in an email saying that we probably miss that, unfortunately. So then we'd be waiting. I don't know if there is a decision day in December, and then even then it's quite close to Christmas.
Just to say thank you for that, Bryony, because if we're going to miss it, then I would go back to 21 then, because
I'll refer to Nancy's expertise on the calendar.
Thank you.
I can't answer that question off the top of my head. I don't know what advice. I mean, obviously, the longer period of time, there is quite a lead in for cabinet member decision days. So the longer period of time you're out for consultation, the tighter it gets for Bryony to do her report and everything. But yeah.
I think as a committee, I think we need to make sure that the decision is made by November so that the taxis can be having it for their most profitable period, because it will be the busiest and the largest, as we know, most trade is happening at Christmas. So I think we need to ensure that's the case. If that's the case, I'm going to suggest that we leave it at 21 if everybody is happy with that. Okay, agreed? Yep, agreed, perfect. Okay, and then finally, it's really to approve the list of consultees. Are we happy with the list of consultees? And yeah, that's fine, Angie. Very comprehensive. So happy, we're all agreed with that. And let me just put my glasses back on. What am I trying to read it without them? And then, of course, that obviously that it's going to the cabinet decision day. So I think we pretty much given you everything you need there, Bryony. Councillor Porter.
And of course, as Bryony said, the councillors will receive this as well. So if they have a particular care home or a particular independent living group in their area, please, we will encourage them to get it out to them as well.
No, I think that's vital. I think, as we know, as councillors, we often have some of the best links with our community. So I think we need to, as we do with almost anything like this, seek to ensure that every group that needs to be sort of dealt, consulted is. Okay, thank you very much. Yep.
Chairman, I'm terribly sorry. I've got another meeting I've got to go to. But
Okay.
I wanted to make sure I listened to that one. It's
That's
very
perfect.
interesting. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay,
And I'm sure that you will do the next one justice.
thank you.
Thank you.
We normally do. Okay, so with that, now we're going to move on to the next paper, which is the policy departure for Driving Miss Daisy Limited. Okay. We'll read the one that has page numbers on, not my scrawled on one as I go through, otherwise I'm going to have no page numbers for anyone and that will not be helpful. Okay. Okay, so we're turning to page 41, agenda item 6. Okay, so our recommendations are consider the proposal put forward by Driving Miss Daisy and agree to depart from the council's policy for companies' licensed drivers and vehicles if the committee concludes that there are exceptional or compelling reasons to do so. So that is our recommendation and what we're looking at as a committee tonight. We have picture all of you should have on your desk as well, just for reference, of the bright blue van. So let's go through. Anything on the first page there on page 41, which is sort of 1 to 3? Anything on page 43, questions? And then we get to the page where I think we might get something, page 44 and sections 6 and 7. Section 8, public sector equality duty. Questions or comments? Okay, moving on to what is now the risk management table on page 45, 6 and 7. Any questions? Okay. Yep.
If I can just go back to page 44, 7.4. Driving Miss Daisy Limited offers a comprehensive history for all their vehicles, including MOT service report from Portsmouth City Council's approved testing station. Do we not have a system of testing vehicles that are going to be used and driven in Winchester?
Thank you, Councillor. So Driving Miss Daisy have a number of vehicles already licensed by Portsmouth City Council, which is where they're currently based, proposing to move their operation to Winchester so that they're more centrally located. What I have advised is that we would accept an MOT certificate, a valid MOT certificate, from a garage based in Portsmouth, but that the mechanical testing would need to be done by a Winchester City Council approved testing station, which Driving Miss Daisy have agreed to.
I'll continue. So let's have a look at page 47, background. Does anybody have any questions on the background? Yep, Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'm fine now. In background, little concerned about the name. It's not licensing per se, but is there a copyright issue? Because there was a film with this virtually the same name. I mean, Portsmouth's got a store called Apple Store, has nothing to do with Apple computers. They seem to be getting away with it. Are you gentlemen able to answer that sort of question?
Yes, we hold the registered trademarks for both the brand, so the logo, which is the daisy with the heart in it, and Driving Miss Daisy as well, when it is applied to the care and specialist transportation services that we offer. To do with the film, then it's Warner Brothers, whoever owns it there. But from our side of things, we do hold the registered trademarks across Europe for our operation.
I mean, it's their responsibility in ours.
Councillor Comoison.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just ask a couple of questions here, just to make sure I'm fully understanding what's going on here. The first thing, I'm aware of Driving Miss Daisy, as a very good friend of mine used your service for about a year when he was going through M&D. So I know it's much, much more than a taxi service. It's a care service rather than a taxi service. But I have a number of questions. So one is I'm not aware of if there's any other direct competitors. We heard earlier about Hackney carriages being able to take a wheelchair, but I know that's not the same. But I just wonder, are there any other competitors in the marketplace? The second question is around the background, which is, what are the reasons for relocating from Portsmouth? You're operating out of Portsmouth at the moment, so, and I know that my good friend lived in Winchester, so you're able to operate a service there. So I'm not quite sure why there's any real benefits to the public in being in Winchester rather than in Portsmouth. And then the third question is really related to the vehicle type. Now, as I see taxis, an ordinary taxi service is basically an ordinary car, you know, maybe a little bit modified, but they're on the market and all that sort of thing. Everyone can get one and can drive. So there's not a lot of differentiation, whereas the Driving Miss Daisy vehicles are substantially modified from a normal thing. Huge amount, well, a lot of money goes into that. So what I'm wondering is, given that the ask is to relax the age and hence the CO2 type of implications, I'm wondering what the vehicle availability is of more modern vehicles, perhaps electric assisted. I mean, I can imagine some of the challenges with those, but I'm just wondering if, you know, what the current state is on vehicle availability in that category of vehicles. Sorry, it's multiple questions. I apologise to everyone else.
Greg will interrupt me when he needs to. So, firstly, we intend and will comply fully with the Council's requirements with respect to age of vehicles. It's a few, relatively small number, that are already licensed with Portsmouth that we may wish to transfer to Winchester. I mean, everything new will comply, and I've discussed those details with Bryony. What was the other one?
Why were you wanting to move from Portsmouth to Winchester?
Yeah, well, it's called the Client Services Centre, which is currently at the Pure complex in Port Solent. We want to be further into the county, its location, and to be perfectly blunt about it, there are 13 local authorities, as I'm sure you're acutely aware, and to my knowledge, no two are the same in terms of their regulatory requirements. Winchester is as near as we can get to being a standard, and it's applying a quality right across the business. So that's a key one, and also it's regionality. You know, we do operate right across the county, and that's only going to increase. So that's the prime reason. We are about to make a significant investment in moving, but we're not ready to press the button until we have an endorsement of our application. Greg will answer the vehicle ones. I mean, we've been here for 8 years now, and I would say daily we're watching what's going on with vehicles. If there was something fit for purpose, and as far as we are aware, there's not a single electric vehicle of the size that we want to use, and they're all converted. There's nothing that's designed from the bottom up on the planet, as far as we're aware. I'll let you answer that then, Greg.
Thank you. Councillor, the vehicles, as you quite rightly observe, are very specialist. They're the only ones like them on the road. They've been designed to our specification. By profession, I'm an engineer. And when we started Driving Miss Daisy in the UK in 2014, I set about with a challenge of being able to take a client in a wheelchair comfortably from Land's End to John O'Groats in a way that is impossible at the moment. The vehicles themselves, and you talked about Hackney carriages earlier on, about the lack of wheelchair accessibility, cost an awful lot of money to convert. When we start, all our vehicles are Euro 6 at the moment, so they're all compliant with the ultra low and low emission zones. We are looking constantly and working with both manufacturers and converters, looking at the availability and the applicability of both hybrid vehicles and zero emission, whether that is hydrogen powered, whether it is battery powered. We're looking at all options. They in themselves raise a series of questions of engineering technicalities that we're looking to get over. When I refer back to the original specification which I put together, which is how can we take my mum in a wheelchair from Land's End to John O'Groats and she would actually enjoy the journey. When you start looking at battery powered vehicles, the battery packs sit between the two sets of axles, which raise the floor pan and raise the position of the chairs to a point where actually many of our clients physically can't get in and out of them. It also creates a problem in terms of where the wheelchair would go, because at the moment the conversions of the vehicles and the Ford Tourneo Grand Connect that is shown in your documentation, there is a significant amount of engineering goes on in terms of cutting away the back of the vehicle to lower the floor plan, new exhaust systems, new fuel tanks. There's a whole range of things in there to enable the wheelchair to get in, so that the ramp at the back, these are rear access ones, is not too steep. They've all got winches associated with them, so we don't have to push the wheelchairs in. They're all big enough to take electric wheelchairs, most of them. So the design of the vehicle themselves and the future proofing of these things is something that we are constantly looking at, and I am working with Bath University at the moment in terms of what the options may be to move towards zero emission, because at the moment there is nothing on the market and nothing coming through the manufacturing pipeline, because the way that it stands across the board is that the manufacturers don't really care about wheelchair accessibility. They want to turn out thousands of vehicles, not the few that we run through the Motability scheme and similar schemes within the UK. So we have to take standard vehicles and adapt them. And electric vehicles, battery vehicles at the moment are certainly not that. We have trialled them. Another issue that we get with battery powered is range. If we put a bariatric client in a powered wheelchair in the back of one of these, we may add 200 plus kilos to that. We did trial a vehicle in and around Bath a couple of winters ago, and we were actually getting less than 50 miles range before we had to spend the rest of the week charging the thing up again. So range is a real problem with electric only. We are talking to manufacturers about conversions to hydrogen, but the big issue around hydrogen at the moment is the lack of filling stations. And we would see, certainly if we were going to project this forwards 5 or 6 years, that hydrogen would be the way that we would go with all our vehicles. They're all wheelchair accessible. Another point that I would make on that is the external colour scheme. We have 3 very senior doctors on our advisory panel, a consultant oncologist and 2 senior GPs, and they worked with us and their colleagues in the psychiatric arena to produce a colour scheme of the vehicle, which has been designed to lower anxiety levels of people living with dementia. It doesn't cover everybody in every case and every specific type of dementia, but the colour scheme itself, we spent a lot of time and effort in terms of getting the colours right with the yellows and the blues to reduce those anxiety levels, because we have at the time when it's taken us 2 hours to get a client into a vehicle because it's scary. And the same with the insides as well, and we're now re-engineering the insides. So yeah, I won't bore you with all the technical details from front to back of these vehicles, but they are the only ones like them. They are designed to our specification, and the reason for that is that we want our clients, I want my mother, if she was still alive, but the whole aim of the game is to get her so she would enjoy her trip in a vehicle, no matter how long it was. And we ensure that all our drivers need to travel in a wheelchair, in a vehicle, so that they fully understand the implications of having the change in the centre of gravity, the change in the handling, the braking, the acceleration, and everything that goes on with the vehicles, because we care. It only accounts for a small proportion of our work, the transportation side of things, and as you quite rightly mentioned before, Councillor, we spend the majority of our time dealing with clients, enabling them to enjoy their lives, and that's a whole range of services, again, which are probably outside the scope of what I'd like to hear about, but I'm more than happy to talk about it. But you will be here all night.
Councillor Crumwason?
I absolutely do want to hear about it, actually,
No.
because that is the differentiator from a taxi. So you didn't talk about competitors. I'm not aware of other competitors that do anything similar, but you probably know if there are some.
Sorry, I've left that one. No, we have a marketing department. Driving Miss Daisy operates not globally. Originally started in Canada 25 years ago, migrated to New Zealand and has been operating in New Zealand for about the past 15 years, been operating in the UK since 2014. If you look for an organisation, a business of any type that offers a service that we do on a scale, on any form of scale, you won't find one anywhere in the world. And there is a reason for that. And the reason is that we deal with vulnerable clients. We deal with the families of vulnerable clients, and age isn't important to us. We currently work with and have been bringing a client, young lady, up to the college in Winchester from Portsmouth on a daily basis because her anxiety levels were so high that she couldn't get here. And so we ensure that we have a female companion driver with her, and we don't use the motorways. And so the age isn't important from our side of things. We deal equally with special needs children as we do with the elderly. And in fact, we took the oldest lady in the country, unfortunately she's died since, to her birthday party 2 years ago. She was 112. And we've found that across every country that we operate in and every country that we've looked at, there is no competition, because actually it's really difficult. It's a very difficult service to offer because we care about our clients deeply. And in order to do that, it means that things change at the drop of a hat. So we've developed our own software platform, and the HQ of that is based in Portsmouth at the moment, and the software company will be coming, assuming that we move, as well, to enable us to cope with both operating a national vehicle fleet, partly franchised, partly direct, to cope with the specialist care requirements that we have and caring requirements that we have for our clients. And that could be dementia, it could be physical, it could be chronic illness, acute illness, a whole range of things, anxiety, pure loneliness. We also have specialist services that we offer to the NHS. So we're contracted into South Central Ambulance Service, hospitals across the Midlands specialising in kidney dialysis and getting clients in and out from their renal units. And the software platform enables us to cope with an ever-changing environment, ones which most organisations just can't cope with. And we accept the fact that we may take a booking for a client, which could be to a day out, which may involve some driving, but predominantly companion work. And that might change 2 minutes before we get there to pick them up. And that's absolutely fine. And the reason it's fine is because we, as I say, we care very deeply about our clients. We have a range of specialist companion services as well, in conjunction with our medics, which revolve around oncology, dementia, diabetes, stroke, cardiovascular disease, and kidney dialysis, because each one presents its own specific problems when, if we're taking, somebody who's going through kidney dialysis out for a day, and, on the 3 days a week that they're not into one of the renal units. And we need to be able to cope with those issues on a immediate action first aid basis, wherever we are. So the one thing we are not is a taxi service. We are not a private hire service. What we do have is a very specialist vehicle fleet and a very specialist range of companion drivers. And because of that, we accept the fact that, in order to be able to operate on a national basis, we need to hold private hire licenses, and we comply with the relevant legislation and the relevant requirements of the licensing authorities, of which there are many, and none of them,
Brilliant.
no two are the same.
I think it's fascinating. I think you're offering a service that's very unique, and I think the key things. I mean, if we sort of carry back on the paper, I think mostly if we're going to be anything that's going to probably bring up questions would be on page 51, 52, which is really here. The policy, is the areas here which are the mitigations, the risks, and the reason. So we've got here our various policy sections here, and the fact that we need to, they're the sort of key things that we're needing to look at. That's very kind, knocking. And also sort of section is, 12.9 and 12.10. So it's really about the fact that the licenses and the public safety of older vehicles, and the fact, I think one of the questions here was how many vehicles, I'll come to you a second, Brian, how many vehicles are there actually that are older? And then I think also we'll have a question from Councillor Kern and then one from Laming.
Thank you, Councillor. So in our meeting with Paul last week, I think he said there's probably circa 5 or 6 vehicles that need moving from Portsmouth to Winchester. I think we can agree that the adverse impact on air quality would be relatively short-lived, and actually Dave, who is a bit of an expert in air quality, did say that would not even be quantifiable.
And how old are they as well?
They're only a couple of years older, aren't they, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, the council's legislation or policy, I should say, says 5 years. So we might get up to 7, but it wouldn't be any more than that, I don't think. And also, because there's a transition here, we're moving a fairly complex operation from Portsmouth to Winchester, and we're going to keep the current Portsmouth operator's license open for a year, because, as I've discussed with Bryony, we don't want to what do they call it, big bang this, because there's a lot of our employees, and they are all employees, that when they come up for renewal, that's the point that we will change them, but work with the licensing authority here within whatever boundaries are agreed. I mean, and if a vehicle is questionable, we'll trade it and get another one. I mean, it's not, a big issue, I don't think. So, I mean, there's about 20 totally at the moment held by Portsmouth. Some of them do not need to be licensed because they work directly for the NHS, and they don't do any other work other than the NHS, which is a law unto itself, isn't it, the NHS. But all the others, where we're doing work in the community, and we are recruiting people at the moment, companion and drivers, and wherever possible, those will be dual trained and dual licensed. Well, not dual licensed, but dual trained. And where they're out in the community doing work that we know we need to be regulated by the hire and reward legislation, that's what will happen. One councillor Moyson, God, I get the pronunciation. One of the other reasons is, and Bryony knows this because we had the conversation, that in Portsmouth, when we need to get our vehicles, tested just as they will be here, there's only one garage that's done from, next to Fratton Station, right in the middle of the most densely populated city in Europe. And when we've got vehicles spread all over the county, that is a challenge. Winchester, as I understand it, has 4 reasonably spread, and the nearest one to us is likely to be, if I've remembered correctly, is Bishop's Waltham, so, or somewhere around then. That makes a big difference, because there's a huge time cost to going into Portsmouth. So, I mean, it's not the only reason. There's a whole list of reasons.
Councillor Kern.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much for your answers. Very insightful, and clearly your service is incredibly special, and would be a great asset to Winchester. My question, kind of, I think, is more directed to you, Brian. Obviously, we've just heard about the age of those vehicles, and we can clearly see from the pictures that they are well maintained, they're specially adapted. So it's not a question of the sense of the quality of the vehicle. My question is the sense of how do we mitigate against that with our other licensee drivers? You mentioned earlier on in our previous proposal, we've got 50 saloon cars, and every car over that also has to be able to offer access for a wheelchair space. So just obviously mitigating a response we might have from our current licensees, how are we looking at dealing with that in this circumstance? Obviously, I think it's clear to see this is a special exception on these vehicles. They are providing more than just access to a wheelchair space, but obviously that's going to be a question that may well come back to us from our current licensees. And how are we prepared to deal with that? Does it, for example, fit under a special vehicle exemption that we can have as a council? How would that work?
So the policy already gives delegated authority to myself to depart from the policy where there are exceptional, compelling reasons to do so. And I do receive quite a large number of requests to depart from the policy. The difference is that it is one driver or one. And I will consider those on a case-by-case basis. And the majority of them don't come to this committee because it's one vehicle or one driver. So we do license some vehicles that are a little bit older on a case-by-case basis, where they can demonstrate that they're maintained to an excellent standard, that they meet Euro 6 emissions standard, etc. I don't think we've ever received a request on this scale, and by this scale, it's only sort of 5 or 6 vehicles, so it's not significantly more. But the main reason why I haven't made this decision at my desk with my delegated authority is because I think it's in the public interest for the council to really look at what Driving Miss Daisy do and how that is completely different to the private hire service that is available in Winchester at the moment. So I don't, and in my professional opinion, I don't anticipate a significant backlash from the trade because we already consider their requests on a case-by-case basis.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that it's quite a different service, isn't it? So, David.
I'd just like to add to Bryony's answer to say that I just want to be clear that Driving Miss Daisy are not looking for an extension of the vehicle age, so that will remain as per the licensed fleet. And that's where my concerns would otherwise lie in terms of air quality and air pollution, in terms of the older the vehicle that gets, the more the wear and tear, the higher emissions tend to arise from those older vehicles. So they're not looking in terms of that service that Driving Miss Daisy are offering. And if you wanted to just add a little point about the fact that you don't generally take cold calls directly phone in terms of the private hire fleet, you did touch on it, but I think that's what sets this service apart. It's not a service that is making itself available to the general public and therefore putting itself in direct competition to providers that you've alluded.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify that, and I know it's in writing, but we don't do any on-demand work at all. We have zero tolerance to any form of telephony in the vehicle. They have a fuel card and they have a phone for emergency. Unless the vehicle stopped in a lay-by, engine off. I mean, the reason they've got a phone is because Mrs. Jones has been delayed and we need to tell, the doctor's surgery or whatever it happens to be. But so those, I mean, that's one of many differentiators, but that's the main one. And everything is, well, the policy and legislation requires pre-booking, but it's a lot more than that. It's days, weeks, very often months or longer in advance. So, there's no, however, I mean, if it was an existing client, an example, it happened, I mean, this is not here, but it's in Alton up the road, a 22-year-old young lady in a wheelchair stranded at the station, and my son runs that service, and rang him up and said, would you? Well, if we've got capacity, and this was 10 o'clock at Am I on again? Oh, so.
Sorry, try this one.
But under those circumstances, you know, where somebody's in distress and they're already connected with us as a client, then we've got capacity, then we do something about it. We sometimes get contacted by a care home, for instance. Because one of the things that's going on, which I'm sure you're all aware of, is 999 when it doesn't need to be 999. And say somebody who's a visiting carer and they're concerned about their client, and they just need to take them to a doctor's surgery or a hospital, and we get contacted, you know, because the care home is a client of ours. So.
Oh, so we'll just, I think that, I mean, that's great. I think we would like to sort of move on. I think we've got a couple more questions. Am I right? I've got Councillor Laming and then Councillor Cormoyson. And I think we'd then probably try to move to the vote, because I think we've had lots of, I mean, brilliant information and lots of really good questions anyway.
Thank you, Chair. The only small point I've got is on 1213, where we're looking at the licence plate. You don't want one on the back of the vehicle, where I think that is something that I personally would rather see, because it enables people to know where the taxi has come from. If they've got any queries on the licence, they can refer back.
Can I be blunt? That would cause us to stay where we are, I think, because it's having a plate on the back of the taxi makes us an on-demand service, and people, they can contact us and ask for service in that hour on that day, and it's also the nature of the people that we're caring for, and there are lots and lots of reasons, but that's one of them. We don't wear the taxi plates with Portsmouth, and we have to pay a fee, by the way, not to, but we would ask you to consider that request.
So anywhere in the country ask you to have a plate on the back?
As far as I'm aware, there might be one other local authority. You know, I mean, I deal with not all 422 of them, or however many there are, but a lot of them, and it's one of the key things that we ask, not plead, but we get close to it because we understand the ramifications. And on the other side of that coin, you know, when the authorities, especially the elected body, understand the services we offer, they don't want us to go anywhere near a taxi plate anyway, because they understand that that's not what we are.
Okay, thank you. I just need to understand that.
Councillor Cormoyson and then Councillor Clear, and then she promised me it's a very little question, so she is the last, the absolute last.
This is really a question for Bryony, really. I think listening to what we've heard, you know, it's clear it's a very different type of service to a taxi service. You know, given the experience I've seen of, you know, my friend using the service, you know, I obviously want to support it. But I guess my question for Bryony is this: do you have the flexibility within your licensing framework to create a separate category of service that you can define certain characteristics, you know, and issue a license on that basis to Driving Miss Daisy, and then consequently, because what I'm slightly concerned about is in the paper it comes over as an exception for Driving Miss Daisy, whereas if a different outfit came along and said, hey, we've got this fantastic service, they wouldn't have that. They would have to go through the same process again of getting an exception for them, perhaps. So is that trying to create it as a generic exception that another competitor could come into the market? So do you have the flexibility to do that at the moment? And if not, is it something we can look at?
Bryony, can I comment before you answer that? We've done this 60 odd times so far with different authorities, and I didn't write the councillor's question, but I'd like to have done, because we would absolutely love to have a category which we could fit into. I think we had this the other day, councillor, when we were speaking, that, you know, it's government policy to integrate NHS with social care. you know, because one can't work with the other, whichever way it is. And we're not resistant to having other competitors, but it is so difficult that you're not going to get them without a special category eventually. And we are up at government, central government level, when they stop paying bloody musical chairs up there, to start to have a dialogue about this with whoever the new levelling up department is. It is really, really difficult, but we would love it if you had the the authority to create a category.
I think what might be useful is something perhaps to have a chat offline, would be to have a chat about how that might be, though we wouldn't be possible, but how we could perhaps write to government and perhaps say that this is something that is coming up within our licensing committees and might be something that we as the licensing committee of Winchester are interested in, looking at the government and asking for answers. So I think we've done that before, where we've written letters to whoever the minister of whatever it is going to be. When we find that out, I assume it's levelling up, but it might be something different. So when we find out, when everything happens next week, we could perhaps start to compose a letter. I'm going to do Angela now. Councillor Clare, sorry.
Very quick, and I take it the omission of a licensing authority plate didn't cause Portsmouth City Council any issues at all. And one more question, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask this, but because I live in Wickham, sir, I just wondered, if you get your licence, whereabouts in Wickham will you set up?
Well, you'll be a neighbour.
Where will your operating base be?
Yeah, you'll be a neighbour in Wickham.
Are we happy? Do we have? So do we want? I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't an issue for Portsmouth. You not having it?
No,
okay.
no, it wasn't, and there was no debate about it either. You just pay your £50 or whatever it is, and you get one that's about the size of a postcard in the window, bottom left.
Okay, so I'm going to propose that we move the recommendation that we put forward, that driving Miss Daisy, and agree that we can depart from council policy for the company's licensed drivers and vehicles, and that we can conclude that there are exceptional or compelling reasons. So does everyone in agreement with that? So agreed? Okay. Perfect. All right then, I'm going to look at my agenda. Request for, what have I got here? Request for delegated authority. Wait a second here. To be granted to the licensing subcommittee. So this is agenda item 7. The licensing and regulation committee is requested to delegate authority to a licensing subcommittee to determine the application for table and chair licenses under section 115E Highways Act 1980, tables and chairs, where officers consider it appropriate that the decision is taken by the subcommittee and do not under their existing delegated authority. So as a committee, are we happy to delegate that to the subcommittee? Agreed. Perfect. So I'm going to say the meeting is over. Well done.